Okay, cool. Ready? Let's do this. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Baker's Ed podcast. I'm Dina Hamed, and today I actually welcome one of my big sisters, Sara Hamed, to the podcast. She is, and I'm just going to read the introduction that I wrote for her here. She is a confidant of mine, a fellow thinker, highly creative individual, an educator, a mother, and a very soon to be doctorate. She's currently writing her PhD dissertation in Islamic ethics and charitable organizations in Canada. And to me, Sara, she's not just my sister, but truly one of my best friends. Whenever I have any kind of creative or productivity block, I always have the urge to call her and talk to her because I know one conversation with her will cleanse my mind and give me the strength, creativity, and courage to pursue my goals again. And I know as bakers or members of the baking industry, we are passionate and ambitious people, and a lot of us have our own personal passion projects and long to do lists that we want to complete to achieve our goals. And it can be incredibly overwhelming to do this. So, Sara's here today to talk to us a little bit about this book she's been reading called Writing No Matter What by Joli Jensen. She's read part 1 and part 2, and she's actually found that it has a lot of great insight about how to tackle passion projects. And it was written for writers, but I think that a lot of the advice that she shared with me so far is highly transferable. And hopefully it helps you as much as it helps me because the Baker's Ed podcast is my personal passion project, and I wanted to share with you guys kind of a continuation of my first introductory episode, a bit of the thinking and the strategy and approach that's going to be behind tackling the Baker's Ed podcast for me. So hopefully you benefit from this chat. I have no doubt that you will because a Sara conversation never fails. So without further ado, Sara, welcome.
Thank you, Dina. I'm so excited to be here to talk with you. It's always very cathartic for me to talk with you as well.
You're so sweet. Okay, well, I sent you the questions ahead of time, but I'm just going to read off of here and we'll get started right away. Just tell us a little bit about the book and why you started reading it and how beneficial it's been for you so far.
So the book is called, like you said, Write No Matter What. But then the subtitle is Advice for Academics.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
And it's by Joli Jensen.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I started reading this book is because I'm undertaking probably one of the biggest writing projects I'll ever have to do in my life, my dissertation.
Yeah.
And as you know, I am not a very scheduled or routine person.
Yeah.
And dissertations are something that require you to sit down and you to set deadlines for yourself and to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I still need guidance on how to achieve that since it's not something that comes very naturally for me.
I struggle with that too.
Yeah. So this was, and I have a whole bookshelf of books on writing and how to write properly and how to become a writer and how to do this and how to do that. So I'm an avid collector of these kinds of books, but this is one book I actually found to be very helpful. Um, yeah, should I get into that or we
And
can?
like implementing it?
Yeah, yeah,
Before you
implement.
get into it, though, I wanted to just clarify. Do you find that it's difficult for you to sit down and show up because of your own, I don't know how to say this, like your own personality, or is it also because you have a lot going on? Like how much of it is you and how much of it is your circumstances? And how
So
has
yeah,
the
yeah,
book been
yeah.
helping?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's so many things that bleed into each other.
Yeah.
So the personality piece is definitely there because, like, I recently found out that I have processing sensitivity. I have sensitivity processing, like a disorder for processing
Isn't
sensitivity
it
disorder,
HPS or something?
HSP.
Oh, HSP. Sorry.
HSP. So it
Hopefully
means,
HPS doesn't mean something bad.
well, I don't know. Maybe it's probably a different thing, but HSP is being a highly sensitive person. And
Okay.
it doesn't mean like sensitive, like I cry about everything,
Mm,
although like, maybe when I was little I did. But it means that I'm prone to being overstimulated.
right.
So more than the average person. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
1 in 5 kind of people have some level of this.
Right.
I made a mistake, Dina. It's actually not sensory processing disorder.
Mm-hmm.
It's sensory processing sensitivity. Those are two different things. So
Okay.
HSP is sensory processing sensitivity.
Right.
And it means that my energy levels can fluctuate dramatically if I'm not cognizant of how I'm allocating my energy and giving myself recovery time.
Mm.
Okay. So that discovering that as an adult was a big piece of this, because always like scheduling for me is like, how do I organize my time? But I've never thought about how do I organize my energy. That's a completely different, perspective I hadn't even thought of before. So the personality piece is there. And it's also juggling a lot of different things,
Yeah.
like
Mm-hmm.
being a mother, having your family and the emotional labor and other kinds of labor that go into that.
Yeah.
And then also being someone who is passionate about a lot of things, so often distractible. You start things and leave them, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it was all sorts of things. And then time management, like I really don't have very good time management skills, so that's just being honest. Yeah, so it's all of those things at once.
Right. And like not having good time management skills is something that I'm getting better at, but people from the outside, they hear all of the like the things that I'm doing. I have one friend who whenever like I announce that I'm doing something, she's like, "Oh my God, like how do you make time for this?" I'm like, "I don't." Like it's not like I'm not like making this conscious effort of trying to manage my time. I feel like I'm being attacked by everything and then I just try to attack back,
Yes,
and
yes.
that's not the best way to do things. So, yeah, I think now that's a good segue to get into, you know, this idea of showing up every day, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you
Mm-hmm.
said you took. Or, you know what? I'll leave it to you. Whatever you want to start with from the book, go.
Mm-hmm. I think the idea of showing up is like the key intervention that I've taken away from the book. So
Okay.
the idea is that you want frequent and low stress encounters with your passion project. So in this case, in your academic writing, but it
Mm-hmm.
could be, of course, anything, right? And so, what does it mean to have frequent and low stress encounters? So there are three pieces to this that Jensen gets in the book. So the first one is to have a project box. So
Okay.
I can talk a little bit about that. The
Yeah.
second one is to have a ventilation file, which I can talk about as well. And
Okay.
the third one is kind of like from the temporal time management perspective, which is just to tell yourself that every day I'm working on this for 15 minutes and I don't have to do any more than that.
Hmm.
So I want to actually talk about that in a moment a little bit more.
Yeah.
But for the first one, the project box, it's basically a physical box that you have that you can open and close.
Like this? Kleenex
Yes,
box?
a Kleenex box. I mean, you can't really fit much in there, but for
Yeah.
illustrative purposes.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like a little filing box, and
Right.
it has like some folders in it. And the idea is every day I open it, sit with it for 15 minutes, and close it if I want after the 15 minutes. And then I've kind of done my time with my project. I've spent time with my project.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the idea of like a physical box is like when you have something you can physically open and close. I mean, it's comforting to know that this is my project. It exists in the world, has a physical form. I can put it on the shelf. I can take it down, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's the project box component.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think the three components are all about taming your project in your own mind so that you can have those frequent low stress encounters with it.
Right.
Yeah,
So that it's not like this intimidating thing that you feel like you can't approach. So
exactly.
you said you wanted to talk about encounter or showing up for just 15 minutes a little bit more.
Yes. So I've heard this articulated in different ways, and I'm sure other people have too. So, from the temporal perspective of like, okay, I only have to sit for 15 minutes. I mean, for some people that might work. For
Right.
me, I found that that's one aspect that didn't work. What
Mm.
actually ended up working instead was to say to myself, I only have to write one sentence.
Hmm. So you let it look like you just you took okay, well why did you do that? Why
So it
was it
was,
one
yeah,
sentence?
it was taking basically that concept of like make it something that's not intimidating for you, the
Mhm.
smallest possible unit, could be of time or of work, and just committing to that. For me, the unit of time, I wasn't convinced that 15 minutes um, would, it takes me so long to transition into working
Mm.
that it always felt like those 15 minutes were wasted. the act of actually
Right.
making myself write a sentence for me always generates another sentence or another one, or you know what I mean? Like it's more generative for me than saying 15 minutes that could bleed into like 2 hours.
Right, right.
So just
Because
about knowing myself, like,
that
yeah.
exactly because for me at least when I think about okay, I really wanted to hone my baking skills, right, on my own time outside of work. Because depending on where you work, you don't always get to practice the things that you want to get better at. You have to make whatever that, place requires you to make. So whenever I thought about, okay, every week I'm going to do this recipe, and I would like get a huge calendar and I'd be like, okay, this week is this recipe, this week is that recipe, this week I never did it. Like I maybe would do it for like 1 or 2 weeks and then I would, fall off the wagon and not be able to keep that up. So let's say there was, a baking student who really wanted to hone their skills. Can you brainstorm with me a little bit what maybe that smallest unit would be for that
Mm-hmm,
for that
mm-hmm,
baking student?
mm-hmm. So I was recently talking to my learning coach, and he said, look for the path of least resistance.
Hmm.
What is your path of least resistance? Because for me, I know I could pick up my phone and write a sentence towards my dissertation. It could be a descriptive sentence. It could be, oh, today, what does my project feel like it's really about?
Right.
Um, for baking, for someone who's like trying to build a baking practice or hone a particular skill, I mean, you would know much more than me, but what is something, the path of least resistance? Is it, because I feel like if I was if I was a baker, my
Mhm.
problem would probably be collecting recipes and collecting like the artifacts of baking rather than actually doing it.
Right.
So what is the first small step you feel like you could do almost anywhere? I don't know if that's something that
Bake almost anywhere. Hmm.
it's
I
a
would
difficult
say
one.
instead of that, instead of trying to make recipes outside of what you might eat on
Hmm.
any given day, I would maybe be like, okay, I'm going to be,
Hmm.
making food for myself anyways. I might as well, incorporate something new that I could learn into that day, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
And I think maybe too, it depending on who you are, maybe it doesn't have to be this scheduled thing. Like it could be within this week or within these 2 weeks, I just want to bake something new.
Hmm. Hmm.
Anything at any
Yeah.
any time. Maybe that
Yeah.
could be like the smallest unit
Yeah. I
for
think
it.
I think you got it, because I think the whole point is the path of least resistance means that you can do it. It already exists in your schedule somehow.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
I have my phone. I have a piece of paper and a pen sometimes. That stuff is handy. I have my mind. I could create a sentence in my mind,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
For you, you have to make food for yourself at some point in the day,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So you're already going to do that. So you just have to do a little bit more, or maybe even just change the way you look at that particular practice in order to accomplish that thing and
Mhm.
get you started. And you might end up, while you're standing there in the kitchen making your lunch or something, deciding, okay, well, I'm here and I'm feeling it. Let me just make this too.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, I was just while you were talking, I thought of something else too. It could be even because a big part of learning how to bake, at least the way that I was taught, is observing, is watching.
Mm,
So, you know, I used to stand beside Dino, Chef Dino Mancini. He's my apprenticeship sponsor and mentor, and also my employer. And I would stand beside him when I first started baking bread at Sweet Paradise. I remember the very first shift. He just had me stand there and watch him how to
mhm.
work with the dough, how to do that. So maybe like one thing could be watch videos. I'm sure there's like tons of videos online
Of
where you could
course.
just observe somebody making it. And for cakes, we know that Instagram is just like covered in cake decorating and cake making. And so yeah, that's also another small unit. Or read like a little bit of a book, or a baking science book,
Mm-hmm,
or
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
yeah, something like that. I'm just trying to make sure that whoever's listening will be able to, or at least give them a little something to bridge the gap between
of course, what we're talking
what we're
about. Yeah.
talking about, and maybe apply it to their situation, because I'm able to do that for myself, but I don't know
Mm-hmm,
what everybody else's passion projects are, or like what they're
mm-hmm,
trying to
mm-hmm,
accomplish.
mm-hmm.
But yeah. You said you were talking about the project box. Was there
Mhm.
anything that you wanted to expand on there?
So, okay, I said that I'm finding this book really helpful, but I want to be like full transparency about the parts that don't work for me and the kinds of shifts that I've had to make them work for my particular, personality style and lifestyle.
Yeah.
So while I find this idea of a physical project box very helpful,
Mm-hmm.
because so much of my dissertation exists on a computer,
Right.
um, I don't always have to open it to feel like I've worked on my projects. That's
Hmm.
why that temporal aspect is not always working. And so although I do have my project box like right behind me here,
Mm-hmm.
I don't always have to open it. And so, but I find that the existence of this box where I kind of just put whatever book I'm currently working on or article that I can then open when I want to revisit it is helpful. It's comforting. But I
What's
don't find
comforting
it,
about it?
that's a good question. I mean, because the alternative is when I think about knowledge, I think about a sea of articles and endless books that I have not
Mm.
mastered and that I could be reading at any one time. But
Hmm.
when I kind of have a book in a cage like that with an article in a cage and I know that this is what I'm focused on,
Mm-hmm.
somehow that seems to help me kind of just, this is what I'm working on at this moment and it
Yeah.
exists in this box,
And you don't have to worry about all of the
all these other
other.
books that I have in front of me here or that exist in the ether somewhere, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, they're
It.
currently
Yeah.
irrelevant.
It helps you focus,
Yes.
and eliminate all of the other things that's intimidating you.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really helpful. The project log.
Yeah.
So I guess it's helpful in a way that maybe the writer didn't like intend it to be.
Possibly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't get that from the book, but I think that that's kind of like a um
It's okay. It's okay. Go ahead.
oh, sorry about
Yeah, we
that.
just got interrupted by one of
Omar, my son.
yeah, Sarah's adorable kids. But you know what? Like I was saying before we actually started recording, we don't live, in a vacuum. We have kids and other people in our lives. And honestly, if anything in from the pandemic, like if I learned anything from the pandemic, just even if you're going to put something online, just be real about who you actually are and
Yeah,
don't try to, I was
exactly.
telling him like I'm trying like at first I was like so paranoid about being so professional and like being like as if I'm like a radio show host or something. I'm not. So might as well just embrace all the other stuff.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, we're having a low key conversation, so it's nice to
Yeah.
just chill
No
and
big
do
deal.
it.
Okay, so we talked about the project box. We talked about the showing up. Was there anything more about showing up that you wanted to talk about? I did have a question of like in particular
Yeah, shoot.
for that.
What's your question?
So, how do you cope if one day you're not able to show up for your project?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
for me, that like, I don't know why I do this to myself, but if I slip up like once or if something doesn't go the way that I imagined it going, it derails me completely. And I'm just like, okay, I can't. I'm not going to continue then. Or
Mm-hmm.
it takes me so long. I'll stop for like a long period of time. And then it'll take me so long to build up that momentum again and get back into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how do you cope if one day you're not able to?
Okay, so for me, there are two reasons why I probably wouldn't show up, or
Hmm.
maybe three. One is usually outside of my control. Something does come up and it kind of derails my day, and I can't really recover it. That doesn't tend to be the reason why I don't show up. So
Hmm.
let's just full disclosure. The second one is because of this, finite amount of energy that I have that is so quick to dissipate. If I'm not careful and I don't like deliberately allocate it and give myself recovery, I am very prone to burn out after just like a
Hmm.
couple of days of a little bit more work, maybe than the average person.
Hmm.
And then I'll need like a day, sometimes two to recover. And
Wow.
that always comes with guilty feelings of like, why do I need all this time to recover? Like now my whole schedule is thrown off, all
Ugh.
this other like negative self talk and all
Oh,
that kind
that's
of stuff.
awful.
And then the last one is if I have some kind of anxiety or like fear around my project that emerged because of like, a new level that I'm at, or some kind of very difficult to think through text or whatever. So in terms of that, I'll start with that one, the last one.
Mhm.
That's where the ventilation file is actually very helpful and has been very helpful for me. So we can talk about that. That's the last component that Jensen has. It's sort of like the three parts of taming your project. The
Right.
one being the project box as a physical like incarnation of your project. The second being the ventilation file actually, and then the
Mm.
third one being the 15 minutes a day.
Oh, okay, so we went a little out of order.
Yeah.
That's okay.
So the ventilation file then is supposed to be like a physical file that you have in your box where you just write out your fears and anxiety around your project and treat that as actually part of the work of doing your project. And I think that's the key to all of this is
Mm.
that often when we think about our passion projects, we think in terms of production.
Yeah.
We're wired to think in terms of production, that all work towards your passion project is production work. Like you're producing something constantly, right? And if you're
Hmm.
not producing, then you're not working.
Mm.
But I think that what I'm starting to discover is part of the work of doing a passion project, especially if you are doing something new to yourself or that
Mhm.
feels new to like, your field or your discipline, is dealing with the anxieties and fears that come with that. That's just built into it. And having that inside your project box as part of your project, I think is
Mhm.
really powerful and a helpful way to think about it.
Yeah, because if you just think about constantly producing, then you're assuming that you're an expert already at whatever it is you're doing, and that's not usually why you're doing a passion project. It's usually because you're trying to
Exactly.
learn something, right? So,
Yes.
yeah, I don't know why we're not just able to make that connection and be like, okay, yeah, I should be able thinking about it, just sitting there thinking or resting, not even thinking about it should be part of the work.
I think it's because we valorize and glamorize production so much.
Hmm.
Like when something is new is coming out, we're constantly consuming, novelty of some kind or what
Right.
feels like novelty. But I think that
When really
this
it's not.
it's
Sorry,
yeah,
yeah.
that's true.
Yeah.
But also that I think a lot of work is transitioning between different kinds of work too.
Hmm.
So let me give an example. Like
Yeah.
when I take my kids to Taekwondo, okay, and then I come home from that and I want to start making dinner.
Mhm.
To me, those are two very different kinds of work that require some kind of a transition. For me, this is what it feels like. I don't transition very easily between these different kinds of things. I
Right.
take time, right? And I think that what this book is talking about is how can you curate the best conditions to transition into your passion project on a daily or
Hmm.
frequent basis, right? But
Okay.
what it's not talking about though is you're constantly having to transition between different kinds of work in your life,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
This is just one example of how to deliberately transition into your passion project. But often you're like, I have to transition into making dinner or taking the kids to school or spending time with them or, dealing with a problem
Came
at
up out of
work or
nowhere.
a family thing that requires more emotional, or you hear something on the news. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
there's a labor to absorbing and internalizing, the negativity around you or, the difficult stories.
Mhm.
And so transitioning is just for me a difficult thing. And so I think that the ventilation file is like the key very useful piece that I got out of this book, which is it's an opportunity to give yourself a moment to deal with what's difficult about transitioning into your project,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And it doesn't
Mhm.
ignore it. It doesn't just you don't binge watch to distract yourself. You sit and you write. You could do it on your phone as a note. Like I have many different ventilation files on the go, depending on where I am. Sometimes I even voice record myself and I
I
don't
was
have to
just
come
gonna
back to
say
it.
that. I've done that. I'll be in the car and I'm like, my notebook isn't here. The notebook that I usually write, random things in, isn't with me. I just whip out my phone to voice recorder and I start babbling to myself. Or sometimes I don't even record it and I just speak out loud and
Mm-hmm,
I get the thought out.
mm-hmm,
Yeah. But it
mm-hmm.
is nice to kind of have it recorded so that you can revisit it and
Yeah,
be
if you
like,
wanted to,
if you
yeah.
wanted to. Yeah, to
Mm-hmm.
reflect on that. So you had mentioned this to me before, but what usually happens
Oh
when you're
yeah.
venting? Yeah.
Yeah. So I was gonna say like the name ventilation file doesn't quite capture everything that's going on. So often when I, whether I'm writing it out on my phone or if I'm just voice recording,
Yeah.
I will start addressing my concerns as like a distant, kind friend. Like the way that if I called you, Dina, you would say,
Mhm.
well, you could just do this. Like, why don't you just do this? Like or just, don't be so hard on yourself. Or I can start to see it by creating that distance of like capturing it through some other, mode.
Mhm.
I can then create a distance where I can start to kind of address my concerns and anxieties in a calmer and more forgiving and charitable way. And
Mhm.
that helps a lot. Sometimes I come out of it with a plan.
Huh.
I mean, and then you're just one step closer to production, right?
Right.
um so that's the benefit of the ventilation file, and I think for me that's the key piece that's been helping. And I've kind of expanded my idea of what this file is. It could be a phone call with you, Dina. It could be a phone call with one of my dissertation buddies, people that I try to meet with on a weekly basis to write together. We're
Mhm.
both working on our own things, but like in close proximity on Zoom or whatever. Or it could just be babbling to myself in the shower
Right.
sometimes. But it's the
Yeah.
idea of deliberately addressing your anxieties and venting them out as well.
Right. So, how hard was it for you to let go of the idea that these certain things that Joli Jensen is recommending, the project box, the ventilation file, and what showing up, she says, looks like? How hard has it been to let go of what she says they should look like and, implement them in ways that make sense for you? Like,
Mm-hmm.
because something I struggle with is holding on to whenever like an expert recommends something to me, holding on to what they say it should be and not giving me myself the space to just let it look like what it needs to for me. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
how has that been for you?
So I think that you just said it. I think when you said an expert is telling you something,
Mm,
I think we often forget that you're an expert in yourself. If you're at all an introspective and deliberate and self-aware person, you
right.
have a kind of expertise about yourself. And so when I try to read these things now, I try to realize that yes, this is an expert writing for a general audience, but they don't know me. For example, they
Hmm.
don't know I'm an HSP, right? I only
Yeah.
recently discovered that. And even how my HSP personality presents,
Mm-hmm.
someone who writes about HSPs doesn't know the particulars of my, situation.
Yeah.
And so I have to, through trial and error and through introspection and through talking it out with myself, give myself the space to try it out and adjust it as needed.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no way that this is going to work for everybody the exact way that it's written here.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So I guess I just try to tell myself that. I struggle with the same thing though.
Yeah. I don't know why. I don't know where it comes from, but I tend to always think in like these absolute terms. And I'm aware of it now, so like I'm working on it, but it's really hard. I catch
Mm-hmm.
myself like the other day. Yeah, so every Thursday I'm supposed to publish, or like, I've set
Mm-hmm.
this goal for myself that I'm gonna make a Theory Thursday short little video that talks about some kind of baking science concept.
Mm-hmm.
A
Mm-hmm.
baking science concept, to be honest, that I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole social media thing got me all caught up in like, what would people want to see? What would people want to see? And then I forgot that this is actually, I started this because I want to make videos about the concepts that I'm interested in, and to slow it down and, do all the little bits that I was never told or I
Mm-hmm.
was never exposed to when I was a baking student. That's where this this originally came from. And then I got all caught up on, I wasn't able to produce that video last Thursday, and I was so hard on myself. And then just yesterday I was recording a podcast episode with some guests, and their audio wasn't captured. And two like double whammies, right? Back to back.
1 second.
Okay, no problem.
I am back.
No worries. Yeah, so I was saying two double whammies back to back,
Yeah.
you know? And I was I'm not going to lie, really discouraged. And I thought about, even though I've just started, the thought of not continuing crossed my mind. And I'm like, you know what? Forget it. Why do I even bother? And then it, like, took some self talk to get myself to like calm down. I didn't use that. Well, maybe I did,
A
get myself to
variation of
calm
it.
down, a variation of the ventilation file. Now that we're, see, but I just did it again. I didn't use the ventilation file, but I did. I talked to myself, and
Yes, you did.
that's a version of the ventilation file. But yeah, there you go. I have, like, I think in these absolute terms, and it's so hard for me to shake that. Do you have any like ideas of where you think that can come from?
Yes, I do. Perfectionism. I
Oh,
mean, it's one of the
oh,
questions you sent me, and I
it
thought about that a
is.
lot. And I actually want to offer up maybe a different way of thinking about perfectionism that to me is a little bit more helpful.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, go
Sorry.
ahead.
Before you do that, though, I just want to, like, okay, so perfectionism used to be something that I, like, would pride myself on. I'm like, yeah, I'm a perfectionist. I like things to be, blah blah, like, so perfect, blah, 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 whatever. It just means I'm detail oriented. It means I'm blah blah, whatever.
Yeah.
And then now I'm starting to realize that, I actually think perfectionism is something I suffer from.
Hmm.
It's not even. So that's where I am right now. I just want everybody to hear that before we hear the
Hmm.
new
Or a
ideas,
different,
not
possibly a little
not
bit
yeah, a
different.
little bit different that you're gonna suggest. Yeah,
Hmm.
because I've already gone through some kind of transformation for me. So let's see what happens
So
now.
again, I'm hearing like you said this sort of like absolute like zero
Mm-hmm.
sum game like being played out, and I
Yep.
want to suggest that for me it was kind of different. I started with this idea that my perfectionism is like my curse that debilitates me and
Mm.
doesn't allow me to do anything, and now I'm transitioning to a more um, nuanced understanding of perfectionism.
Okay.
So, along with this idea of my energy, thinking in terms of organizing my energy, I try, like in the morning when I wake up, to say, my perfectionism is a finite resource. I have a stock of it for the day. And
Hmm.
I can use it deliberately for specific things, but it's not necessary for everything that I do. If I try to use it for everything, I end up burning myself out because it's impossible. It's
Hmm.
just impossible. And I often end up looking back at the day and saying, did I accomplish something, or did I spend the whole day anxiously anticipating accomplishing everything and get nothing done? Right?
Yeah, it's usually the latter for me.
For me too. Maybe not nothing done, but not what I wanted, not what was
Yeah.
important to me. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I think about perfectionism as a resource that I have a limited amount of for the day, I can say, okay, when I make dinner, does it have to be perfect? No. When let's say I'm cleaning something, it doesn't have to be perfect. But when I'm working on my outline that I'm going to send to my committee, do I want it to be that high caliber, detail oriented, better than what I sent them the last time kind of work? Hell yes.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so that's what I'll focus on, my perfectionism. I'll say that this is my resource and I'm pouring it all into this one thing. Everything else can be the bare minimum. And I think it's just training, because otherwise I ignore that part of me that is a part of me. I mean,
Yeah.
as an HSP, I'm someone who is very detail oriented,
Mm-hmm.
who is, in tune with subtle things, who is imaginative and wanting to, take things to the next level, everything that I do. And I'm sure not just HSP, it's like lots of people have this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so this is also my strength. I mean, this is what means I could write a grant proposal that is really, really, really good,
Mm-hmm.
right? I can teach a course and take it to the next level.
Mm.
Um, but it can also be debilitating if everything that I want to do, I hold to this impossible standard or very difficult standard. So
That is
that's kind of my
such,
workaround.
Soda, that's so helpful. So you think of your perfectionism as a resource that you can tap into, and
Finite
a
resource. Yes.
finite resource.
Mm-hmm.
So a fine, oh, right, because it's not limitless. You can only
Yes.
use it for certain things. Otherwise, you would
I,
allocate it
I,
to everything.
and
But
then I
that's
would
not
burn
realistic,
out,
and you would burn out.
right?
Yeah,
My
yeah, yeah.
energy would be affected. And
Mm-hmm.
I think of it as a daily finite resource, not like I have like this much for my life. So how much of it am I using today? That's not helpful to me.
No,
It's
it's
more
not.
helpful to say today, what is the thing I'm going to focus my perfectionism on? Everything else doesn't get any of it,
Hmm.
sort of thing.
Hmm. And you know what? We survive. It
We
doesn't get
survive.
any of it, and we move on. And your kids love your food. I just ate at your house the other day, and that chicken and cauliflower rice was so good. So you
Happy to
survived.
hear
And that
it.
wasn't perfectionism, cauliflower and
Mm-mm.
chicken. It was
It was
so
not.
good.
It was toss it, throw whatever on it, and hope for the best cauliflower chicken.
It was really
So
good. So I think your bare minimum cooking is delicious.
is working well enough. And I guess it
Yeah.
means that I don't get them used to like a certain standard that I have to keep up. Those have to, they think that that's
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
So
yeah. Well, that's
yeah,
even better because
yeah,
then it's not realistic. You can't live
it
your
really
life that way.
isn't.
See, that's why I was starting to get this idea that, uh, my perfectionism is a curse. I can't live like this because I'm applying it to everything. So, yeah, I will try to start doing that and I'll report back and let you
Mm-hmm,
know if it's working for me too. Yeah.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I just have to remember to do that. That's the other thing. Like, what am I going to remember to do? I have to like use my
I know.
ventilation file and I have to do this.
Well, see, you're thinking of it as like a
I
to-do
know. I
list,
can't
right?
stop.
And that's my problem with schedules is that they just
Yeah.
seem like these oppressive, like that
The video I sent
video you
you.
sent me. Yeah, they
The
seem like these.
reason, yeah, I
No, go
know
ahead.
nobody knows what this video is, but
Yes.
and the reason why I was sending it to you was because when I listened to it, I'm like, wait, is this actually helpful? I honestly, I don't think I understood the video. If you understood it, go ahead, share it. I think if there's
So
anything helpful,
okay.
but you don't have to. I
No,
mean,
no, it's fine.
yeah.
I think the point of the video was this idea of like your schedule or your to-do list is like this oppressive list of things that are like looming over you,
Mhm.
and making you feel guilty. But what if when you sat down to write your schedule, you said, what is the thing that I like will enjoy doing today?
Mm.
Like, you know what it's like? You know that episode of The Office where Joe, who's like the owner of Sabre, she
Mhm.
buys Dunder Mifflin, and she says, "Can you put your name on the day?" And feel like if you feel like you can put your name on the day and you've done an honest day's work, then go home to Michael Scott. She said that to Michael
Yeah.
Scott, and I always found that so helpful. Like, could I put my name on today? Like, what would it
Mm.
mean for me to put my name on today? And I don't think it means that I've done everything on this like impossible list of stuff to do. I think it means I've worked hard on one thing I really care about and got everything else that I need to get by. I've managed those things,
Mhm.
to a
Mhm.
minimum like extent,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
I think that was the point of the video, but I might not be.
Yeah, I'll try to
Yeah.
include the video in the episode link or like the description area of the episode so that people know. I don't
What we're
even remember
talking
who
about.
was in it, but was it
I think
Jordan
it was
Peterson?
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's right, right. Okay, I'll try to include it. It's just like a short little YouTube short clip. It's
Mm-hmm.
not nothing really long. Yeah, I do like that way of thinking of your schedule, especially the whole, let that other stuff, you know, just bare minimum on the other stuff. It doesn't mean that you're not putting your heart into it or whatever. It's just that what we're trying to say is that you're not holding it to that perfectionist, crazy standard where you're going to be so hard on yourself if it doesn't look that way that you have it in your head. It doesn't mean
Yes.
like you don't, feed your children properly. No, you do.
Of course not.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I just want to make that distinction.
Yeah. No, I think that's important. I
Yeah.
think actually, Dina, like again, I was talking to my learning coach today,
Mhm.
and he was saying to me like, it seems to me that you have an issue with prioritizing. And I told him I don't know how to
Mm.
prioritize because I can convince myself that the stakes are just as high for everything that I want to do in my life.
Right.
I want to be the best mother there ever was. I want to be like a full professor and I want to be like the best teacher this university has ever seen. I want to be, you know what I mean? Like I can say these are all really important. Like, how do I choose which one is the
Mm.
thing I'm going to pour my heart and soul in?
Oh, that's
But
so
he told
hard.
me, think about your day. You're not going to do those things all in a day. So on your day, what do you have on your docket? What are you going to focus on for today?
Mhm.
Put your,
Mhm.
heart and soul in for today. And I feel like that's a little bit more helpful. Like I
Yeah.
don't schedule now based on intervals of time. It just doesn't work for me. I have to think energy. I think I have to think about my energy. Yeah.
Mhm. No, and you know what? I think that's really helpful because you have this idea or this image of yourself and sometimes you get really, or at least for me, I get really down on myself when I'm not doing the actions that I associate with fulfilling that image. on a day-to-day basis,
Yes.
but like knowing that you don't have to be that every single day to get there. You know what I mean? Like I have very similar goals as you to become a chef professor at a college, right? So I would like to be an educator as well. And sometimes I'm like, when I'm not working towards being that thing on a day-to-day basis, I feel like I'm never going to accomplish it. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not true, because I think it matters that, like you said, we look at the things that we do on a day-to-day basis as part of the work of accomplishing that goal, even if
Mm-hmm.
it's not writing my working on like my teacher dossier or my CV or producing those videos online, the theory
Mm-hmm.
videos. You know what I mean? Like living
Mm-hmm.
my life is part of achieving that as well. So,
Right. Again, it goes back to that production mentality. Like, I mean,
exactly.
production is important. I'm not going to say that you
Mhm.
can achieve that without producing certain things, but that's not all the work that goes into achieving those things.
Yeah.
It's just part of it, right?
Yeah. Because that also means that if you you can like kind of think of it in reverse. If you don't accept that living your life and making space for family and making space for all of those other things that you are and you're a part of, then being that chef professor, is that really the only thing that you are? That's the only way you're going to be defining yourself when you come to actually accomplish it? Like when I become a chef professor, then what? You know what I mean? And that like tends to happen to me. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's where sometimes my imposter syndrome starts to creep in. So I like accomplish certain things, and then I'm always thinking, then what? That I don't actually look back and look at what I accomplished as like a huge body of work that I should be happy with. You, you know,
Yes, I totally agree.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's really hard. That's another thing too, that imposter syndrome.
Yes.
I feel like we should touch on. How has some of this advice that you've gotten from the part one and part two of this book helped you with imposter syndrome in particular?
Mm-hmm. I think imposter syndrome is like part and parcel of any sort of passion project that exists in a world where there's an idea of expertise around
Mm.
that thing.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And so, and it has to do with like performing, like trying to perform that you've now become that expert that can talk about XYZ or can,
Yeah.
practice XYZ or whatever. Um, for me, imposter syndrome is I have two competing ideas in my mind at any one time. One is that I don't know enough and therefore I'm not.
Mhm.
And the other is I could do this really well. Why am I not?
Hmm. Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
And so I don't know if this is the right way to think about it or if there is a right way, but I think that whenever I use my ventilation file,
Yeah.
sort of like what ends up being the conclusion of like my rant and my addressing my rant, and that I'm already much closer. Like I'm much more that than I think I am. Like I
Mm.
am already a teacher. I'm already
Yeah,
an
you are.
educator.
Yeah, you
Yes,
are.
I'm not a full professor. I'm not a professor. I'm a graduate student, a graduate candidate, but I'm already teaching. I'm already doing that thing that I love and I'm excelling at it. I just don't have the formal,
Title.
title yet, but I'm doing a good job at it. So I am
Mhm.
that thing
And you're enjoying
and I'm enjoying it.
it.
And I'm enjoying it. So imposter syndrome, like it's a useful concept, of course, to think about how your feelings and not to ignore them, how you
Mhm.
think, but
Mhm.
it's also, I think, fixating on it kind of quiets that other side of you, because part of what's driving many people, and like for me, part of what drives me to apply for that next teaching gig or work on my dissertation is I know that I can accomplish this. Like
Mm.
on some level I know that I have it in me to do this thing. I do believe that about myself, otherwise I
Mhm.
wouldn't have put myself in this position
Yeah, because
in
we
like an
never put
intentional
yeah.
way,
We would
right?
never put ourselves in a position to look stupid or incompetent.
Foolish,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And so there is another side to imposter syndrome, which is that you know that you have it in you,
Mm.
and it's just a matter of like reorienting yourself to that voice over time. Like again, I think, I don't know.
I know. I mean, of course, and I just want to, tell everybody and preface this. We probably should have done this from the beginning, but just say that these ideas that we're sharing and stuff, we're by no means like giving you definitive answers or solutions. We're just having a conversation, and hopefully whatever we say is helpful. If it's not, then
Mhm.
you have the liberty to throw it out the window and not use it at all.
Of course.
Yeah.
And we do too, right?
Yeah,
So we can
exactly.
throw it out the window tomorrow or something.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's a really helpful way of thinking about imposter syndrome. That on some level, you know that you can accomplish it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be trying to
Mhm.
accomplish it. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's really helpful. Well, we started talking about, being educators and still students. At least I will probably until I die think of myself as a student. I believe in lifelong learning. But
Mhm.
one thing I wanted to ask was, how do you think students, and this might be a little bit difficult because, students, there's many different kinds of students, but
Mhm.
I know maybe we might be generalizing a bit here when I pose this question, but how do you think students can benefit from the ideas that we've talked about so far from this book?
Mhm. Um, so again, like you said, students, it's a broad term.
It's
So
a
I'm going to
broad
talk
term.
within, my sort of world and where I'm situated,
Yeah.
which is I interact with university students
Mm-hmm.
mostly, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure many of like a lot of this is again transferable, like you said.
Anyone who's
So
trying to learn something.
exactly. In my case, though, so I'm going to talk about students in relation to myself when I'm an educator. When
Got it.
so when I'm like working on creating a course, which I've had to do a couple of times. So I've taught one course myself as an instructor, but I've had to come up with multiple courses for like dossier, whatever, other
Yeah.
stuff. I think about a couple of things. Number one, I think about the importance of creating space for iterative practice.
Can you
Okay. And
explain what
this iterative
iterative
practices.
practice is?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So like repeated
Mm-hmm.
practice. So again, coming back to the book, one of the main interventions that Jensen is making is that you need to create opportunities for frequent, low stress encounters with your passion project. And
Mm.
I think that that's a good way to approach any skill building, actually, in my opinion, is
Mm-hmm.
frequent and low stress encounters with that skill. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
when I'm creating a course or when I'm trying to teach something, I try to create for students an opportunity to have frequent, low stress encounters with the thing we're trying to learn.
Mm.
So in this last course that I just wrapped up,
Mm-hmm.
they had to learn how to analyze a primary source and write a paper on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is a big skill. It's not, especially if it's your first time doing this.
Oh yeah, of
So
course.
throughout the term, yeah, I had an assignment. I told them you can't get lower than 80% on this assignment.
Nice.
It's a 5 times you have to do it. You can do it for the 12 weeks if you want, but it's a weekly thing, the top 5 marks.
Mm-hmm.
And those marks are basically you reading part of a primary source
Mm-hmm.
and you were answering some questions that I've pre-designed for you
Right.
and facilitate like an interaction with the source.
Yeah.
And you're doing that iteratively
Mm.
without
Which is
worrying
the
about your
five
mark,
times.
which is the 5 times or more. So
Oh,
students
okay.
actually requested that they be allowed to do it every week if they wanted to
Oh, that's
and just take the
awesome.
top 5 marks. Yeah. And so that's one of the things that I do. Like this is the kind of opportunity you have to create, I think, for learning, because learning does not happen when you hand in a research paper. Like
Mm.
people think
Mm-hmm.
that you hand in a paper and then that's it. There's never built into courses an opportunity to do drafts of your paper.
Yeah. It's just that
And
one
that is so
shot thing.
important.
Yeah.
Exactly. A one shot thing. And I don't think skills are learned
In
as a
one
one
shot.
shot thing,
Yeah.
especially if it's a high
Yeah. Yeah.
stakes one shot, right? Like,
You know what? What you're touching on right now is exactly what a lot of industry, like employers in the baking world, they say that when our graduates come into the bakery, they
mm-hmm,
don't have a sense of what it's like to produce in volume and
mm-hmm,
produce a big production. And I think that's because some of the programs in our colleges, not everybody is like this for sure, but it still exists that we have like a skills based model. So when I was in school, at least, you would be in the kitchen lab and your professor would demo a skill once.
mm-hmm,
I mean, they would do it again if you asked them to. But I mean, like, the idea is that they demo the skill at the beginning of the class, and then you have an opportunity to then make that product.
Mhm.
repeat the skill that they demoed. So like they
Mhm.
would show you how to, you know, like mix the dough together. Then you would go
Mhm.
mix the dough. Then they'd show you how to shape the dough.
Mhm.
Then you would shape it. Then you proof, and so on. But you get that one shot for that particular bread, let's say, and then you don't make that bread again. And that doesn't exactly build in to our program any kind of iterative practice, like you're
Mhm.
saying, or
Mhm.
drafts, but draft for baking, which is
Mhm.
repeating over and over and over again, which is such an important part of being a baker, is practicing the skill. So it's
Mhm.
amazing that there are still, skills based models out there. But I understand why. Like, they just don't have the capacity or anywhere to funnel all that food that students would be making. Right? Like,
Mhm.
if we got each student to make, like, I don't know how many variations of that bread in a week, where's all that food gonna go? Right?
Food
So it
bank?
has
I don't
to
know.
be, I don't know. I don't know. It has to be funneled through something, right? So it's
Yeah.
not just like, it's not, I understand that the colleges that, like, they have to work within their means, but that is an interesting thing to take a look at to improve if
Mhm.
possible. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. And like you're saying, like there are particular constraints on trying to create this
Oh, of
in a
course.
course as well. I mean, when you have 200 students and if you have each student write 3 drafts for a paper, I mean, your TAs will just like run away. Like,
Yeah.
like there's no way they're going to mark all of
I'm
that.
like, are you
So
sure
there
about
are
that?
there are there are issues around
Yeah.
trying to accomplish that in every particular skill. But I
Yeah.
still think that there may be ways to kind of incorporate iterative practice. And that's
Mm-hmm.
actually another part of the book. So part one of this book
Mm-hmm.
talks about looking at writing, and again, this could be transferable, as a craft
Mm.
rather than as like something that you're not just a writer that who performs that I'm a writer.
Mm.
You are engaging in a craft, and that's what makes you a writer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's
So
just like
like
being a baker.
exactly,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. So the fact that you're writing is what makes you a writer. It's
Yeah.
not that you perform a certain outward, thing to be a writer.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
100%.
Yeah, yeah. And we talked about this. We talked about
Yeah, we
how
did.
like it's like if you're sculpting something, you have your block of marble,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to create this elaborate sculpture, and you're an artist, so you could probably explain this better than me. But the idea being that like the more you chip away at it or whatever it is you do to marble, it's going to look like these blobs before it ever ends up looking like an elaborate and detailed, you
Like the
know.
David.
Yes. And you can't just jump from the block to this.
To
I mean,
David.
it's just, yeah, it's ridiculous and, and
Yeah, it
and
is ridiculous.
insane to even think that you could do that.
He has to
And
be
yet that's
blobby
the
at
kind of,
first. Yeah.
it has to be in many blobs, right? Before
Mm-hmm.
you get to slowly, you get to your detailed sculpture. And it's, for some reason we still have that expectation that, where's your paper? I mean, like you had 2 weeks to write it. I mean, yeah, but it's just writing a paper. Like you need to have a chance to write
Yeah.
it and write it again and write it again. And students, that's a lot of work, first of all. And second of all, um, nobody teaches them to do that. There's no space to do that. So I think, to get back to your original question, for students and for educators, I think that there needs to be opportunities for iterative practice. And I recently started tutoring a student on academic writing who wants to apply to med school. And I
Mm.
told him, I'm sure you have multiple papers from previous courses. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to ask you to do something that is probably shocking and painful. Take those papers and edit your own work. Go back to it. That's the hardest thing to do for me, is to look back
Yeah.
at something that for me is done. I don't even want to look at it anymore. I got my mark. I'm done with this. No, that's part of your practice, your craft. Honing your practice and your craft is to go back and see how you can take it to the next level, from this kind of amorphous blob to like a more refined one, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So
Take
yeah.
pictures of your baked goods and then, weeks or months from now, go back, take a look at it and see how, and then, or not even, take pictures of it, let it sit. Next day, take a look at the picture and be like, okay, how could I make this better? What do I think? Or consult somebody. That's another thing too. Consulting someone.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I had a question. It popped up. Um, oh man, I
disappear.
should have, yeah, it kind of disappeared. We were talking about
Craft,
craft,
iterative practice,
iterative practice, yeah. It might come
forms.
back.
Yeah.
Darn, it was a really good one too. It'll come back. It'll come back. But oh,
Yeah.
I got it.
Got it?
It came
Yes.
back. Okay, so be honest. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I know you're not a full professor yet or whatever, but you're still an educator and you're still teaching people. How much more effort is it on the educator's part to include that iterative practice for their students? Like, has it been difficult to do, or do you think that, like, if other educators wanted to do what you're saying, I'm just thinking, I feel like, oh my God, but it's going to be so much more work.
It's not, I don't think it actually is. I'm not convinced that it is. And I'll tell you
Mm,
why, Dina, because
yeah.
I think that often the courses that I've taken, there might have been an attempt at iterative practice there, but it
Mm.
was never shared with me as a student. So for me, it looked like
Oh.
there was these multiple different things that I was supposed to be doing at any one time for this course, or
Oh,
multiple
okay.
things I had to ultimately finish for this course. But part of what I do is I tell my students, these are the learning objectives. And by learning objectives, this is what I want you to walk away feeling like you practiced this. That's what learning objectives means to me.
Mm.
Now, this could be content and it could be particular skills,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I'll say to them, now, how are we going to practice this in this course? I've created this part of the course and this part of the course and this part of the course to feed into each other such that you have different kinds of opportunities to practice this.
Hmm.
And so I tell them I do this for two reasons. Number one, you have to practice,
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, you won't get the skill. And
Right.
number two is I want to respect the fact that, again, students, I think of often in this, in terms of this finite amount of energy that someone has to put towards something.
Mm-hmm.
Students have other things happening in their lives. And I think it's very respectful of their intellect and of their time and of their energy stores when you explain to them how the different components of the course feed into each other. So I tell my students, when you're working on your weekly assignment, you're inadvertently working on your final paper at the same time. Because if you did all of these assignments, you're going to do much better on your paper because it's the same skill that you
Right.
have to perform for your
Right.
paper, right?
Right.
I tell my students when you are engaging on the discussion boards,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes I use prompts on online discussion boards,
Mm-hmm.
you are practicing the long answer questions on your exam.
So what you're doing basically is that you might be like what I'm gathering is that you might be suggesting that these iterative practices might already be built in, and what you're doing as the educator is just you're just helping the students see that they're built in. You're communicating that this will lead to this and it'll connect to this and it's going to help you reach that scary end goal that's in the future. And all
Mm-hmm,
of that in between is practice. And that's
mm-hmm,
what you're
mm-hmm.
doing.
Yes.
And you know what? Now that like I'm just thinking back on my university years, there was one particular professor who did this, and her courses were always my favorite. And I just until you were describing it now, Sally Mackay, she was
Mm-hmm.
the best. She would always do that and explain that you're doing this because it's going to help you work towards this. Other times, you're just assigned this big, scary final project, especially because I was in fine art school. And so basically, the end goal is the project months from now, and we're just expected to work on it the whole time. Giving students, though, who are trying to learn that huge, vast space with nothing in between or showing them how it's going to connect to the scary end goal is actually not helpful
I agree.
in terms of learning.
100%.
It's terrifying.
I think it's actually an obstacle to learning,
Yes, I
right?
agree. Yeah.
It's an obstacle. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but how about let's say those iterative practices aren't built into something?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like what you're suggesting is under the assumption that it's kind of already there
To a degree.
to
Yeah.
a degree. What if it's not already built in?
Well, I think that there's, okay, a course is a course because there's something that connects it to each other, that holds it together,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's, again, I'm thinking in where I'm situated,
Yep,
but for a
that's okay.
university course, I think oftentimes the problem is we think about the course as just being a bunch of information you're going to give the student over a 12-week period.
Yeah.
And I think that that's not what a university course should be.
Hmm.
Because when you think about what a course is like, when we do Introduction to Islam, for example, that course, there is no way you're going to teach them even enough to do a thorough introduction in 12 weeks. So that's not really the learning objective. The learning objective is I want to introduce them to a landscape of literature and give them the tools in order to then dive in deeper and read intentionally and deliberately in different and research in different areas to go to the next level of scholarship. Basically, that means that these are skills to be able to research and to give them a roadmap. That's building up a set of skills.
Right.
So I think that too often courses are sloppy and not they're not intentionally, thoughtfully designed. And from my perspective, and so they're just like a professor says, you're going to read this textbook over the course of this, and then you're going to have like 5 reflection or 6 reflection papers, and then you're going to have a final exam and a final test or a final paper. And so where is the skill building? Like, I want to know what the skills as a student, I think it's my right. And a syllabus is a contract, right? To know what skill am I building through your course? Am I just, because I could take the textbook and read it and I could listen to your lectures, but what are you helping me hone and build?
A lot of my courses were like that in university, in art school. Oh my God. You would just be, I taught myself everything from the textbook because it's just, there it is. Now you go do it.
Go off and do your thing, right?
That's what I'm paying you tuition for? Seriously?
And then to assess me on skills you haven't given me opportunities, low stress, frequent opportunities to practice, and then I get an assessment at the end. And that doesn't seem fair. Does the labor of creating something deliberate and interconnected and communicating that interconnection,
I think that's a big part
of it, take more out of you than just throwing together haphazardly a course? Yeah, it does. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think it's worth it. And you can usually tell. How do you know that a professor or a teacher cares and one who doesn't? You can just see it from the way they kind of put together their course, from the way that they engage students, from the way that they mentor them.
Right? I know what it is. Effort.
Yeah, so like you said, Dina, it does take effort and time.
It
takes effort and time. You can't get away from that, I don't think.
And you know what? I'm just going to put it out there. If you're an educator, you shouldn't want to get away from that. Sorry, but that's just my opinion. Like, if you're not willing to, put in the effort to teach people, then why are you teaching? Just don't teach. Do something else that doesn't require as much effort. Yeah, seriously. No, and I did have like so many really great teachers, but honestly, I did experience that a lot. That you're kind of just, thrown to the wolves and you have to fend for yourself. Yeah.
Dina, I just want to say one last thing about this.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's the difference between, like you said, like some courses might have that built into it.
Yeah.
Already. And I think to a certain degree, most courses do on some level. But I think the difference between communicating it to your students and not is the difference between expecting someone to learn piano without them being mindful that they're learning piano. You know what I mean? Like, they're just kind of going like this, and someone who's sitting there, okay, I want to learn piano. Like, how do I do this? That intentionality, right?
Okay. And let's talk a little bit about why it's important to communicate that, because I'm just like, playing devil's advocate here. Somebody might be sitting and listening and be like, okay, they're students. Do they not know that this is going to lead to this? Otherwise, why would it be in the course? Why is it that we should tell them?
That's a good question. And it goes back to like my teaching philosophy, which I'm building incrementally over time, which is that the relationship between a teacher and a student is an alliance. And if it's an alliance, that means the terms of the alliance have to always be explicit and they have to be negotiated. So there is a power imbalance there between a teacher and a student, for sure.
Yep.
But I think that the onus is on the teacher in the alliance as a more empowered party to create a culture of invitation, to talk about and negotiate the negotiable aspects of the contract.
Right.
So that's what I do at the very beginning of the course, is I tell them, look, this is the syllabus that I've created. This is the course I've created. Now, what challenges do you anticipate facing in this course? And what kinds of support would you need in order to, and this is the logic behind it,
right?
And then we talk it out and I incorporate their feedback into it. I'm not saying you should ask your students, what would you like to learn in your course? And then just like create a course based on, No, I'm not
You
saying
still
that.
have a role as an educator and an
And an
expert.
expert, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not diminishing that, but I
No.
am saying that these students are active learners. They're there for a reason.
Yeah.
And so I think the educator should be creating an opportunity for them to take responsibility for
Mm-hmm.
their learning
Mm-hmm.
in a mindful and deliberate way.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I think that's excellent point. Yeah. I think you nailed it.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, that answers the whole like why should we have to explain it to them? I like this idea of thinking of the educator and the student relationship as an alliance. That's interesting. I've never, to be honest, I haven't really sat down and given that much thought. Kind of just take it for granted a little bit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's important
Agreed.
though. Okay. So I think we covered like a whole bunch of we've covered like almost all of these questions. Yep, yep, hit that.
Mhm.
No. Okay. So this is the last question that I had written down. I
Mhm.
said, "What is the number one takeaway or piece of advice you would give anyone who is afraid to work on their goals?"
Hmm. That's a hard one. The number one piece of
Sorry.
advice.
Okay, you know what?
No,
We're not thinking in absolute, so it
no,
doesn't
we're
have
not.
to be the number one. It could
Yeah.
be
Okay.
just a good
A
piece
piece
of
of advice.
advice to
Okay. So
work on
how
their
about
goals.
this? I'm going to reframe my question as
Sure.
there's someone listening possibly who is scared to start.
Mm-hmm.
What should they, how can they start? Like, what is the thing
Yeah,
they should
that's a
walk
good
away
one.
and try to do
Yeah.
right now? And I think it's to start a ventilation file at this moment, right? And just vent about why you think it's hard because your reasons are going to be different than mine, right?
Yeah.
We may overlap in some ways, but you will have your own particular reasons depending on your own, self-reflection and situation in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that becoming aware of those things and being your own advocate and ally and working those things out and addressing those things yourself
Mm-hmm.
is, I think, the number one thing. And the other thing I would say actually is find mentors. So
Yeah.
the best piece of advice I got, not maybe the best, but one really, really good one that I got from a professor of mine was to have many mentors who are good at different things.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this doesn't mean a relationship where you have someone who tells you what to do.
Right.
This is a relationship of solicited advice. Like you have a particular question that has to do with the particular, situation that you're facing. And
Mm-hmm.
you go and you say, someone who's willing to answer your questions, and then you take their answer and you sit with it and you see if it's helpful to you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that mentorship is often missing in spaces of education, unfortunately. We are so caught up often in this idea of a teacher and a student, and we forget that there are other kinds of relationships of learning that need to exist. And mentorship is one where the experiences of one person are shared with another person who can then,
Right.
yeah, go
I,
ahead.
I feel like I almost need an example of what that might look like, and we can use your situation as an example. You have university students. How can they seek out mentorship? What would that look like for them?
So at the end of the course that I just wrapped up, I, thanked everyone, whatever. And then I said that academia is a place that is doesn't really facilitate mentorship. And what I mean by that is students are probably applying to things,
Hmm.
or maybe they have a grant proposal to write, or maybe they don't know how to navigate their relationship with their supervisor. Academia is full, or whatever space it is full of other kinds of expertise that are not organized and collected in books and in
Yeah.
positions, right? And formal positions. And there is a wealth of information out there through people's experiences of how to deal with a difficult supervisor, or how to deal with a TA situation that's not equitable, or how to write that grant proposal that's very particular to a certain organization. And
Mm.
we need access to that experience and knowledge. And mentorship is, I think, the way to do that, is to find people who are willing to mentor you, who have different kinds of informal experience and knowledge that will facilitate a lot of the obstacles in academia or whatever, space you're in.
No, this is awesome. I'm just thinking about, I'm on the education and membership committee at the Baking Association of Canada, and I'm thinking about this idea of mentorship that you're talking about, I think it would really be helpful for anyone in the baking industry. Baking students, while they're students, after they graduate, and entrepreneurs, mom and pop shops. There should be some kind of network of mentors that bakers can turn to and ask questions and get mentorship about that informal experience, whatever it might be, anything. I always think that the answer to train like our training problems in the baking industry is just more courses, more whatever. But I did not think of this idea of mentorship.
Mhm.
It doesn't necessarily have to be another certificate that they have to go and get. Mentorship from
Yeah.
somebody who's already done it. They've been there, done that, and they can share their experience. That's a really good one. I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, I think that formalized expertise is important, but there's so many gaps that are not filled by formalized expertise, right? That we need to find
Mm-hmm.
ways
Mm-hmm.
to fill.
That's a really good one. Well, is there anything else that you wanna talk about? Like, is there anything that we didn't touch on? Because honestly, I feel like we did touch on everything
I
that
think
at
so
least that
too.
I wrote down.
Yeah, no, I think we've hit everything. I think that I just want to wish everyone luck on their passion projects. Um,
Assuming that you have them.
if you have one or whatever it is
I
your
know it doesn't
your
have
goals
to
are, it
be
doesn't
a
have to be like
project.
a
Yeah.
passion project,
Yeah.
right? Whatever it is that you do day in and day out or want to do.
Or
Um,
get better at work on
yeah,
skill
and
build.
that yeah, and I wish for everyone a way to have frequent low stress interactions with whatever it is they want to do, on
Yeah,
a
and
today's basis.
I'm gonna try to, and if anybody listening has ideas of what that might look like that you already do, share it. Share it in the comments and let us know as bakers, baking students, any like people in the baking industry, outside of the baking industry, what are your ways of approaching or showing up for your goals and your passion projects that are low stress and
Frequent.
frequent. Yes, low
Yeah.
stress and frequent. And I'm going to include the title of the book again. It's Write No Matter What by Joli Jensen. I'll include that also in the description for anyone who wants to read the book. I mean, I am not affiliated with her, or I actually don't know, with the author in any way. And, I don't get any money from sales if you go and buy it. This is just, been a helpful book. And we thought we would pop on here and share some of the things that we've been talking about in private because they're applicable. Yeah.
Definitely.
But thank you, Sara, so much for coming on. It was so much fun, right?
Yeah, it was so nice to talk.
It
Yeah, it was
was. And
great. Thank you for having me.
we always want to have these conversations when we get together with the family, but there's just not everybody wants to sit with us and geek out about this kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
we rarely get the opportunity to do this, so it's been really
Yes.
fun. We should
Yeah,
we
it's been
should do
great.
more. If
Yeah, for
you read
sure.
the rest
We
of the
should.
book and there's more information or anything. I feel like this is the kind of stuff like yeah, the other kinds of interviews I'm going to be doing are important, but I feel like people really like to get advice about this because it's so relatable,
Yeah, I think we're
It's
all
so
going through it
applicable. We are.
in
Yeah.
our different ways.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
definitely agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been great.
Okay, well, thanks again, SARS. And this has been the Baker's Ed podcast. I'm Dina Hamed, and tune in next time. Bye, guys.